When the United States military retreated from the Air Force Base in Plattsburgh in the 1990s, it was like all these huge buildings, all this land, all this infrastructure. It's yours, Plattsburgh. It didn't help with the massive job loss. But bit by bit, the base has become repopulated with businesses and housing. It's a plus for Plattsburgh now. The problem is all that infrastructure is getting old. And Plattsburgh is like, hey, military, you built it. Are you going to help us fix it? That's today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Claxton Hepburn Medical Center, dedicated to providing patient care and regional services to the people of St. Lawrence County. claxtonhepburn.org.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Thursday, September 5th. First up, two green groups that oversee the protection and management of Lake George are ready to move on after a years-long fight over an herbicide. The herbicide known as Procelicor was used this summer to help control an invasive species on the lake, the Eurasian water milfoil. Aaron Shello-Levine reports for the New York Public News Network on how effective the herbicide has been and what the new partnership means for Lake George.
Proponents of Procelicor say the herbicide specifically targets invasive Eurasian water milfoil and dissipates to undetectable levels within days of application. The Lake George Association lost a court fight to prevent the Lake George Park Commission from applying the chemical in June. Now, LGPC Chair Ken Parker says the two organizations are working together again on a management plan.
We have come to a very strong decision to put the immediate past behind us because the long-term history between the LGA and the Park Commission was forever strong. John and I are communicating on a regular basis. We're comparing notes. We're looking forward to not just the coming year of 2024, but 25 and beyond, of working together on different scientific lake projects.
LGA Board Chair John Kelly says the initial data and renewed partnership is promising.
Much of our data is consistent with the Park Commission's data. That is that specifically a great deal of the milfoil in the treatment zones was affected, killed by the Procelicor.
According to the LGA's report, Procelicor was successful in a complete killing of the water milfoil in the treatment zone in Sheep Meadow Bay. A majority of the invasive aquatic plant was eliminated in the Blair's Bay treatment zone. Opponents of the herbicide warned of potential long-term effects of the chemical and argued that hand harvesting had worked in previous years to cull the plant. A study by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture linked Procelicor to so-called forever chemicals, adding to concerns about its use in Lake George. Kelly says the two organizations will continue to work together to track any long-term effects of the herbicide.
Procelicor breaks down into other chemical products, and we are tracking the one that's the majority of the so-called degradant, which is present in the sediment. And we'll be tracking that to see how that breaks down and if there's any sort of knock-on effects of it.
Kelly says he hopes Lake George's use of Procelicor will stand as an example of responsible stewardship.
No application of Procelicor has been studied more than what we're doing collectively between the Park Commission and us. And, we're making all of our data available to inform, all other lakes, not only in the region, but nationally. So we'll be at the forefront of studying this and making the best decisions, and we'll be sharing it.
Parker adds any future Procelicor applications will require Adirondack Park Agency approval.
We may certainly have a list of bays and spots on the lake that possibly are potential need for Procelicor and or milfoil containment, but no, there are no written plans right now to do any more applications in the coming year. That doesn't mean that we're not going to be working on it, and if we all come to an agreement that we wouldn't lay out something in the future.
The initial report found that, as some critics had predicted, the lake's swift currents slightly reduced the herbicide's efficacy. I'm Aaron Shello-Levine for the New York Public News Network.
The Plattsburgh Air Force Base closed almost 30 years ago. Since then, it's become home to an airport, multiple businesses and not-for-profits, and housing developments. But local officials say the sprawling 3,400-acre campus is aging. Some infrastructure is failing. As Kara Chapman reports, they want the federal government to do something about it.
The base was open from the 1950s to the mid-1990s. During that time, it basically operated as its own municipality. Gary Douglas with the North Country Chamber of Commerce says that means it didn't have to abide by state regulations and standards.
The Air Force in those days, we're talking about the 50s, 60s, 70s, didn't care what anything cost. They didn't have to. The annual defense budgets would always take care of things. If they need to replace this, it'll get replaced.
So when the base closed in 1995, it left behind expensive, overbuilt infrastructure that the town and city of Plattsburgh took over. Those systems are now reaching end of life, making their issues more visible and problematic. At a recent forum, Plattsburgh Town Supervisor Michael Cashman said the base property was walloped by heavy rains in June.
So here we are. We have infrastructure that is coming to end of life, it's failing, and now you have the compounding factor of significant infiltration due to a storm.
That resulted in multiple sinkholes on the former base, including along major roadways. The town expects one of them to cost $375,000 to fix. The town's already invested $6.3 million into the base's water and wastewater infrastructure over the last several years. But Cashman says officials are convinced the recent issues are tied to larger problems. They think it'll take at least another $12 million to fix those. That's more than 2/3 of the town's typical budget.
I, the town board, my team, does not want to see that burden laid on the shoulders of the businesses, of the agencies, the property owners, right? The taxpayers. It's unfair.
The town wants the federal government to step up and fix what the Air Force left behind. It's put forward 3 proposals. The first priority is to find out exactly what's going on with the base's aging systems. Cashman says that would involve the federal government assigning an Air Force engineering team to the town or working with the town's engineers to map things out.
There are still many, 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 many unknowns, okay? We have a philosophy of plan the work the plan. And we're well positioned to do that, but we need support.
The town's other 2 requests focus on funding and legislation. Cashman says they're working with congressional representatives to figure out if there's any money available through the bipartisan infrastructure law. He says if that doesn't come through, officials plan to advocate for an amendment to the National Defense Bill that would provide perpetual care for former military bases. Cashman says the town will have to work with federal politicians and former base communities outside New York State to make that happen.
We're in the position where we're not waiting for the federal government to come to Plattsburgh. We're going to bring Plattsburgh to the federal government.
In the meantime, the town's gathering input from businesses and residents on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base about the issues they're seeing. Cashman says they can submit their observations through a Google survey, and the information will be compiled and presented to federal representatives. Douglas with the chamber says when the base closed, the city and town had to take things over, even without knowing the extent of the infrastructure issues. He says that's what led to the redevelopment that's proven the property is more of an asset than a liability.
We could do great things out here. We could transform the community. We could develop an airport. We could attract manufacturers. We could reuse and redevelop the housing on the base, and all of that has come to pass.
Douglas says the region took advantage of those opportunities. Now it has to sustain them. Kara Chapman, North Country Public Radio, Plattsburgh.
We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Christopher Watts of Canton and the Saranac Project of Saranac Lake. I'm David Sommerstein, North Country Public Radio.